So are you thinking about buying a condo or a townhome here in the Atlanta area with high hopes of renting it out? Not so fast. There are some things you need to know, some rental restrictions you need to know about before making that big investment. So stay tuned. I'm going to cover that and a few more other things you need to know before buying your next condo or townhome. Hey guys, my name's Molly and welcome back to my channel where I talk all things living here in the Atlanta area. And yeah, I get a lot of you calling me or sending me emails and you're telling me how you're going to be moving here or you're going to be buying your daughter or son a condo here in the Atlanta area. They're going to live in it for a year or two and then you want to rent it out. I get all sorts of versions of this from viewers like you calling me in. So I thought it was time for a refresher on some things you need to know about buying a condo here in Atlanta and some things that may spoil some of your plans. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, if you will, but I did not make up these rules. So I'm just telling you so you are well informed and you can plan accordingly. So most condos and townhomes here in the Atlanta area have an HOA attached to them. They have rules, and one typical rule here in Atlanta is that they have rental restrictions. I know you'll all have these grand plans of being landlords and building up your empire and making some passive income, right? Well, not so fast. So most of these condo buildings and townhome communities have rental restrictions. Generally speaking, they limit to only 20% of the total units that can be rented out at one time. So if your condo building that you're looking at has 100 units, you do the math, only 20 units at one time can be rented out. Now the big kicker is that usually most of these rental permits have been spoken for. So you have to put your name on a wait list. And that's one thing I always recommend to my condo or townhome buyers is that once you buy that condo, even if you don't really have any ambition of renting it out, just put your name on that wait list because you never know if things change, plans change, and it's kind of a fallback plan that you can rely on. So put your name on that waiting list. And what that waiting list is, it's simply you're just waiting for a rental permit to become available. The person at the top of that list will get the first option to take that leasing permit. If they say no, their name goes to the bottom of the list. The next person on the list gets the option. And if they say no, they keep on going down the list until they find someone that wants to take that rental permit. If nobody does, then that's great. That's just a rental permit that will be sitting there waiting for the first person that wants to snatch it up. But generally speaking, I find a lot of these high-rise condo buildings have a wait list, and some of them can be where you have to wait 5 to 7 years. So the wait list can be pretty long. Now, I've also seen instances where there are some condo buildings or townhome communities where they've got a couple permits laying around ready for someone to grab and start renting out. Now the problem is there's a little bit of a lag time between when you buy a condo or a townhome to actually closing. So let's just say you make an offer on a condo, there's a leasing permit available in the building. Well, you've made an offer on that condo and by the time you close, perhaps that rental permit has already gotten picked up by someone else and now you can't get that rental permit. So that is just not a good strategy to play that kind of game. You're kind of rolling the dice or playing roulette. Now, one thing I want to clarify too is let's say a rental permit becomes available and you say, yeah, I'll take it. Generally, I've seen in the HOA rules that they'll give you 90 days to find a tenant. If you don't find a tenant, you have to forfeit that permit and give it to the next person in line. So don't think that you can just kind of hold on to a permit willy-nilly and wait to rent it out at your own timeline. It just doesn't work that way. Now here's one question I get a lot about this whole rental permit rule situation. I get occasionally the person that's going to buy the condo, have a buddy live with them, or the parent that's buying a condo for their kid. And is that okay that the kid's occupying it and the parent's not there? Yes, that's fine. If it's a family member living in there, that is totally fine. If you've got a buddy living with you and they're paying you rent, that's okay. As long as it's owner occupied or it's a family member living in that unit, you generally do not have to get a rental permit. So that is fine. Where it becomes a problem is if you have someone that is not a family member and you aren't living there and you have them paying you rent, that's not going to fly. So if you want to buy a big old townhome and have 3 buddies live with you and have them pay you rent, that is totally fine. You can just kind of make your own little side contract with them. You're going to be living there, so that is a-okay. Where it becomes a problem is if you are no longer living in that unit and you have people paying you and you're not occupying that unit. That's where it becomes a problem, and HOAs will not accept that. Another thing to be aware of is that if you do have the ability to rent out your unit, don't think you can Airbnb. I find that there are very few condo units or townhome units where you can do Airbnb type of situation. Now, if you own a single family home that's detached, not with an HOA, yeah, you could do that all the day long. But if it's in a condo building, there are very few condos that will let you do short-term leases. Most condo and townhome buildings will make you lease for 6 months or a year. I would say a year is more common, but sometimes they'll let you get away with 6 months. I've definitely had this scenario run by me from phone conversations or emails from viewers like you, where you're saying, well, I want to buy a condo for my parents, and when they come to town, they'll stay there, and when they're not occupying it, then we'll just kind of Airbnb it out. Nope, not going to happen. These buildings are not going to let you Airbnb. There's a few in town that I do know about that do allow short-term rentals, Airbnb situations, but I'm going to keep that to myself. If you want to work with me, then I'll let you know. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's really what it comes down to, as Atlanta does have these rental restriction rules, but I don't think Atlanta is the only city that has them. If you are in a city where there's condo rental restrictions, let me know. I'd be curious to hear where you are seeing that. But one thing I will say is that not every building has rental restrictions. There are a handful of condo units and townhome communities that don't have rental restrictions, but that is kind of far and few between. And I will say, some of these condo buildings that don't have rental restrictions, they're a bit on the older side. They're nothing swanky. You know, most of the high-rise buildings that you're gonna see in Buckhead and Midtown, those all have rental restrictions. So don't spin your wheels too much trying to ask me about, does this building have rental restrictions? Because most likely it is a yes. You may be asking, why are these rental restrictions in place? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with keeping the building well maintained. You know, if the building ends up becoming a building full of renters, you know, renters just don't treat things as well as the homeowner does. So I think it's one, to keep the quality of the building and maintenance up. Also, you know, if there are certain buildings that have too many rentals in it, some people can't get financing. So that could also be another reason that we see rental restrictions in place. But I think above all else, I think most of these buildings want to see not a building full of just tenants. And quite honestly, a lot of people don't want to live in a building where it's just full of tenants and then they're the one person that owns a unit there and living in it. So there's a good reason for having these rental restrictions in place, and that is to uphold the value of the building. Moving right along, another frequent question I get asked all the time by viewers such as yourself that's interested in a condo is, Molly, why are the HOA fees so high? Yeah, I agree with you. Some of these HOA fees for what you get in the building, they are pretty high. Now, I have seen condo HOA fees gradually increase over the years. Just think of it like this, just like when you used to pay $1.99 for gasoline, you know, that was in the past, and now we're paying what, $3.50, $4 per gallon. It's just an equation of costs rise over time, and HOA fees are no different. One thing I always ask when I'm helping a buyer buy in a condo building is I always ask for a copy of the budget, so I could kind of see where is the money coming from and where is it going. And if you ever saw a line by line budget of a condo building, you'll see that there are a lot of expenses to running an HOA building. When you're buying into an HOA community, you're paying for a lot of things besides just the amenities. You're paying for, if there's concierge service, you're paying those salaries. You're also paying janitorial services. You're paying for the utilities to light the hallways, to provide water in the public, you know, restrooms or drinking fountains, anything like that. You're also just paying for general ground maintenance if you've got a crew that's coming to water the grass, trim the bushes. So all of those expenses just really add up and you'd be surprised at how expensive it can be to run in buildings. One thing I always kind of find surprising is that some of these older buildings can have quite unusually high HOA fees, and they don't even have, you know, a pool or a concierge service or anything like that. Why is that? Well, you're dealing with an old building. Old buildings have a lot of maintenance expenses with them. And when it's an old building and there's only like 20 units, you're gonna have to split that cost among fewer people. So that makes your HOA fee much higher. Now, one thing I will caution you on is that if you are buying in a condo building, you should expect that that HOA fee is not going to stay the same forever. Expect that fee to gradually increase. It may not be every year, it may be every other year. I don't know. Every building operates a little bit differently. I know there's some buildings that they kind of go through a budgeting process at the end of the year. They estimate what their expenses are going to be there for the following year. And if the expenses are more than the last year, they may have to bump up that HOA fee by each resident. They try not to, you know, increase it by a drastic amount, but it could go up $20 to $50 or $70, you know, in that next year. I don't really know. I'm just making up those numbers. But the main point is if you think your HOA fee is going to stay stagnant, it's not. It's going to gradually increase over time. The final thing I want to caution you about when buying a condo is that if you plan to finance, you know, get a loan with a lender to buy the condo, there are some things that you may not really know about behind the scenes. It may not become a big deal, but it also could become a big deal. So I'm going to try to explain this as easily as I can, but a lender basically, when they are giving a loan for a condo, Fannie Mae has kind of like a checklist of things that basically that the building has to comply with. You never actually know that the lender is doing this. They kind of do this all behind the scenes, and if everything checks out okay, great, you're on your way to closing. But when there's problems where the building does not comply with the Fannie Mae guidelines, then that's where it becomes a problem. So what's an example of this? Well, one is if it's an FHA loan, that is actually a little bit more peculiar on checklist items. And one requirement for an FHA loan is that they have to ensure that the building is putting 10% of their income into the reserves each year. Now, that's a simple example, but where Atlanta really got stuck, especially starting in January of 2024, is that there was this one lending rule around condos that lenders kind of had a workaround for a long time, but then Fannie Mae basically put the crackdown on that and they said, nope, no longer going to be able to do that workaround. So what I'm talking about is there's a master insurance policy for a building. So they're insuring, you know, things that could break in the overall building. You're still going to get your personal insurance, but then there's also the building HOA insurance, if you will. One line item on that insurance policy is called a per unit water deductible. And I've seen it usually around 25,000, maybe 50,000, give or take. And so basically that's saying, you know, if a pipe broke and there was a water leak causing damage, any kind of damage over that 25,000 deductible, as an example, then the insurance would kick in and pay for any other damage restoration. So the rule is that the per unit water deductible cannot be any more than 5% of the total insurance deductible policy. So if it's over 5%, if it could be 5.1, 5.2, or anything higher, Fannie Mae will not approve that loan. This has become a big issue here in Atlanta because as insurance premiums have gotten more expensive, I know a lot of condo buildings have been trying to cut costs and they would increase their deductible. They didn't really know it at the time that there was this crackdown on this 5% rule. So some condo buildings have been quick to adapt. Some condo buildings have taken a lot longer to adapt or just frankly don't know about it. Lenders used to be able to work around this whole thing back in the day before Fannie Mae got super strict, and they would basically just have the buyer bump up their personal insurance to cover any differential, but that no longer is flying. And so now anytime I have a buyer buying into a condo, the first thing I will ask the agent on the other side is, hey, can I get a copy of that master insurance policy? Any homeowner should be able to grab that from their portal and send that over. I take that and I give it directly to the lender working the deal, and they're going to review that and say, yes, this is compliant, or no, this is not going to work. Now, I'll stress right here that if you are buying a condo here in Atlanta, it can be really helpful and beneficial for you to be working with a local lender who does condo lending. I've heard stories of buyers that have worked with lenders, the big bank lenders, and they did not do well. And, they've wasted a lot of that buyer's time trying to finance a condo building that they could have probably detected very early on that they were not going to get financing. So my best advice is work with a local lender. I've definitely got a list of them I could recommend to you that would be great at helping you get a loan for a condo building. The main thing to know is that lenders are doing a lot of checks behind the scenes to make sure that the building that you're buying into is healthy per the Fannie Mae requirement. So if you never hear much about this from your lender, then that means just your building is in great shape. One last thing I'll touch on when it comes to financing a condo is that some of these buildings are not FHA or VA financing approved. Now, you may be asking yourself, why does that matter? Well, FHA and VA guidelines are just a little bit more strict and have a few more rules. And some buildings just don't want to spend the time. It takes a lot of time and sometimes money to comply with all of these FHA and VA guidelines, and they just don't want to deal with it, and it's a hassle. So just keep that in mind if you are condo hunting here in Atlanta, you plan to use an FHA loan. You need to find out, first of all, if that building is FHA compliant. There's actually a website that you can go to and search by the building name to see if it is FHA approved. And sometimes you'll find that some of these buildings were FHA approved in the past, but it expired and they no longer are. So that's something to look out for. Certainly, if you do plan to use an FHA or a VA loan, make sure you are telling your realtor up front that you are using that type of loan and you plan to look into condos, because the last thing you need to do is waste your time looking at a bunch of buildings that are not FHA or VA compliant. All right, you guys, well, that is it. I hope this was helpful for you. I hate to be the bearer of bad news about the rental aspirations you all had of, becoming those landlords and renting out tons of condos to all the tenants, but that's just not how it works here in Atlanta. But hey, if you've got more questions for me about condos, I got a lot of you reaching out about those. I'm happy to answer them. I certainly cannot cover them all in this video, or I just don't think of the questions until I'm talking with you guys on the phone. So if you got questions, you can always put them down in that comment section or reach out to me. And hey, if you are making a move here, whether that's tomorrow or next year, I would love to have a conversation with you. We can schedule a Zoom call or a phone call and go from there. If you see me out in the wild, make sure you say hello. I'd love to say thank you for watching, but until next time, you guys, I'll see you around the neighborhood.